In John chapter 11, after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, some interesting conversations go on with the religious elite of Jesus' day. In fact, the chief priests and the Pharisees actually gather a council together and make this statement: "What shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." We've talked about that previously, including the statement that the high priest Caiaphas makes: "It is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and not that the whole nation should perish." We need to put Jesus to death. Isn't that kind of against one of those basic commands that they have supposedly been teaching the people and supposedly living themselves? Go back and read Exodus chapter 20. The very last verse of chapter 11, both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, where Jesus was, he should report it that they might seize him. We've got to do whatever it takes to get Jesus out of the way. We do not like what he's saying. We want things back exactly the way that they were before he came on the scene. We want the status quo that we enjoyed to return. Interesting but dangerous point of view. So the kind of disdain, the kind of scorn, the kind of hatred that these people have for Jesus is something that continues to grow. And we've seen that. Back in chapter 7, the very beginning of the chapter, Jesus stays in Galilee more now than any place else, because in Judea the Jews sought to kill him. Chapter 7 of John and verse number 1. At the end of chapter 8, they take up stones to throw at Jesus. At the very beginning of chapter 11, when Jesus says, "Let's go to Judea again," in verse number 7, the disciples say, "Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again?" So chapter 12 begins this way. "Then 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany," that's in Judea, "where Lazarus was, who had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. And there they made him a supper, and Martha served, but Lazarus was one of those who sat at the table with him." Disdain and hatred by the religious elite of Jesus' day makes it dangerous to have Jesus in your home. But that's exactly what Mary, Martha, and Lazarus do. They give him a great meal. When we're introduced to the family, back in Luke chapter 10, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus when Jesus is there at their home, and she's listening and hanging on every word that he says. Martha is actually back getting things ready and comes out and complains to Jesus, "Don't you care that my sister has left me alone to get everything ready and everything prepared?" And Jesus said, "Martha, you're concerned and worried about many things. But Mary has chosen that good thing, and that's not going to be taken away from her." So here's that verse again, verse 2. "They made Jesus a supper, and Martha served," evidently without complaining this time. "But Lazarus was there as one of those who sat at the table with him." What about Mary? Mary took a pound of very costly oil of spikenard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. A deep appreciation. Jesus brought her brother back from the dead. Deep appreciation for things that she's learned sitting at the feet of Jesus along with others as they listen to the truth he imparts about the Word of God and those principles upon which our life should be based. And then in verse number 4, 5, and 6, one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, who would betray Jesus, said, "Why was this fragrant oil not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" There's a disapproval among the disciples coming from Judas. 300 denarii means this was basically a year's salary tied up in this pound of ointment that she's been keeping and holding back for a special occasion. And Judas says, "This is a waste. Why wasn't this sold and all the money given to the poor?" And if you're just listening and you don't know anything about the background or the character or what's going to actually happen in the story, and that's the first time you're introduced to Judas, you may conclude this is the most benevolent person in the group. Nobody else speaks up. He's the only one who's concerned about the poor. But he's not concerned about the poor. He talks as though he is, but he's not. And here's the statement. This he said, not that he was concerned or cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the money box and used to take what was put in it. Doesn't care about the poor, cares about himself. Talks a great story, a great message. He sounds like he's extremely concerned about the outcast in culture. But he's concerned about lining his own pocket, so much so that he's stealing from the rest of the disciples and from Jesus. You start analyzing this particular characteristics of Judas and what he says, and the way some people would initially react if they actually heard this for the first time and never met him before. Sounds like a whole lot of people in positions of authority, does it not? In fact, there are implications from these chapters in John to our society all over the place. He's not really concerned about the poor. He's not really fixing the problem. He's been stealing from the resources that the apostles and Jesus had as they traveled together. And John points that out. Beginning in verse number 7, actually just verse 7 and verse 8, Jesus says, "Let her alone. She has kept this for the day of my burial. For the poor you have with you always, but me you do not have always." She kept this. She hung on to this ointment that is valued at a year's salary. She's kept this for the day of my burial. Discernment. Understanding. Now Thomas, at the beginning of chapter 11, after Jesus says, let's go to where Lazarus lives, there in Judea, Thomas says, well, let's go with him that we may die with him. They understand the danger, but she actually seems more aware of how significant that danger is than do they. She recognizes that timing for Jesus in this life is something that's limited. The statement's made down in verse number 9. It's a really kind of a destructive kind of intent. A great many of the Jews knew that he was there. They came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But look at this. The chief priest plot to put Lazarus to death, verse 10. So you are claiming that it is needful that you murder one person for the nation so that the nation doesn't perish, and now you're intent on murdering two people. Isn't there a law in God's commandments against that? And why did they do that? They did that because on account of Lazarus, verse 11, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. We can't have that. We've got to get Jesus out of the way. Now we've got to get Lazarus out of the way too, because we want our power to go back exactly the way that it used to be. Will that happen? Will that happen? After that really destructive kind of intent is mentioned, there's a discovery and praise that is found in verses 12 down through verse number 17. The next day, a great multitude that had come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees, went out to meet him, and cried out, "Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, from Psalm chapter 118. Then Jesus, when he had found a young donkey, sat on it, as it is written, "Fear not, daughter Zion, behold, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." That's out of the book of Zechariah. Disciples don't put it together, verse 16, until later, after Jesus is raised from the dead. The people, verse 17, who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead, bore witness to all of these things. In verse 18 and 19, there's a declaration. Not individuals that appreciate Jesus, just the opposite. The statement's made in verse number 19. The Pharisees said among themselves, "You see that we are accomplishing nothing. Look, the world has gone out after him." Jesus has related to common people the way that the scribes and Pharisees never did. They viewed themselves as being better than all these common people to begin with. In verse 20 through 23, there's a different kind of desire that's mentioned. It's for individuals that do not have the background of being Hebrews by birth, individuals that are proselytes into the Jewish faith. There were certain Greeks among those who came to worship at the feast. Verse 20, verse 21, they came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, and asked him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Philip came and told Andrew, and Andrew in turn, Andrew and Philip told Jesus. Desire to see Jesus. We want to be around Jesus. We've heard a lot of things about Jesus. We want to see and hear for ourselves about Jesus. Then the topic changes to the topic of destiny. Beginning in verse number 23, Jesus says, "The hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified." The hour has come. It's a different kind of statement, different phrase than "my time is not yet." The statement he makes actually back in chapter 7 of John, verse 6. Here, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. He talks about death and resurrection. He makes a statement in verse 27, "My soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour, and yet for this purpose I came to this hour." Verse 32, "If I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself." He said this signifying by what death he would die. What do you see in John chapter 12? You see danger in harboring Jesus, danger in having Jesus into your home. You see individuals that really are devoted, individuals that have a discerning mind and understand something of the purpose that Jesus has in his immediate future that even those close to him as disciples don't necessarily possess. See a disastrous intent to not just murder Jesus, but murder Lazarus as well. You see the discovery by the crowd of Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and the praise and adulation that actually takes place. You see the declaration from religious leaders that the world has gone after this man, and we can't stand it. You find individuals that really do not have a background in Judaism. They've become individuals that believe in the law of Moses, wanting to see Jesus with a tremendous amount of desire. And you see Jesus talking about his destiny, which at this point in John is close at hand. Jesus giving his life as that sacrifice for humanity then and now. What do you see in John chapter 12? Where do you place yourself? One of the disciples? Part of that family of Lazarus? Among the religious elite? Part of the crowd that have a great deal of exuberance when they hear that Jesus is going to be coming into Jerusalem for the feast? Are those that actually seek Jesus out to find him, as those who have a Greek background are doing? Do you listen intently to what Jesus says about his destiny and begin to understand the immense amount of pain and suffering that's going to follow? There are a lot of things packed into John chapter 12. Things we need to be reminded of on a continual basis. Tremendous chapter. Please stay safe. We'll talk again soon.